Here's William Lane Craig to try to convince us that physics provides evidence that God exists.
Number one, then, the origin of the universe. One of the main doctrines of the Christian faith is that God created the universe out of nothing a finite time ago.
How exactly can an act of creation happen out of absolutely nothing, given that acts, by definition, require time in order to occur? Time at least has to exist in order for anything to happen, including an act of creation. That's why time itself cannot be created, even if it is finite in the past.
The Bible begins with the words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth."
Actually, no, it doesn't, not in the original Hebrew anyway. As Dan McClellan explains,
so if we were to translate it very literally from the Hebrew, it would be an incomplete sentence. It would be a temporal clause that literally said, "In the beginning of God creating the heavens and the earth." More idiomatically in English, we would render, "When God began to create the heavens and the earth." And then verses 2 and 3 would finish the sentence by describing the state of affairs. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was empty and desolate, and the Spirit of God was moving over the abyss, or over the depths. So this is not creation ex nihilo. This is describing the state of affairs when God began their creative process.
Contemporary apologists insist that "in the beginning" refers to the beginning of everything that exists except God. The Bible doesn't actually describe the beginning of the space-time continuum. It only specifies the beginning of the creation of the heavens and the earth. That's not the same thing as space-time per se.
The Bible thus teaches that the universe had a beginning.
No, it teaches that the heavens and the earth had a beginning, not the whole space-time continuum.
This doctrine was repudiated both by ancient Greek philosophy as well as modern atheism. And then in 1929, the discovery of the expansion of the universe dramatically verified this doctrine. As you trace the expansion back in time, all the galaxies in outer space get closer and closer and closer together until finally the entire universe was shrunk down to a state of infinite density called the singularity about 14 billion years ago. Nothing existed prior to the singularity.
If time began with the singularity, then you can't even say that God existed before the singularity, because there would be no such thing as before. This would mean that God had a beginning in the same sense that the universe does. Craig would insist that the fact that the universe is finite in the past means that the universe came into existence in a way that God did not. But this seems like special pleading to me. If God being finite in the past doesn't mean that he came into existence, why does it mean that the universe did?
It represents the origin of the universe, not only of all matter and energy, but even of physical space and time themselves.
Genesis says nothing about the origin of space and time themselves.
Physicists John Barrow and Frank Tipler explain, at this singularity, space and time came into existence. Literally, nothing existed before the singularity. So if the universe originated at such a singularity, we would truly have a creation ex nihilo, that is out of nothing.
Yeah, that's silly. It's not logically possible to create something at a time when it already existed, and obviously there was never a time when time itself did not already exist. Therefore, the idea that time itself could be created is logically incoherent.
Well, as you can imagine, scientists explored various ways to try to avert the beginning of the universe and to regain an eternal universe.
You say, as you can imagine, as if it is to be expected that scientists would be biased against such a conclusion. Why would that be the case? Do you think most scientists are just a bunch of God haters who want to deny anything that happens to accidentally align with what the Bible says? That's not really how scientists operate, Bill.
But none of these efforts succeeded in restoring an eternal universe. Instead, 20th century cosmology saw a parade of failed theories trying to avert the absolute beginning predicted by the standard Big Bang model.
Again, Bill says trying to avert, as though these hypotheses were proposed due to scientists' sacrilegious bias against the Big Bang.
Although advances in astrophysical cosmology have required various revisions to the Standard Model, nothing has called into question its fundamental prediction of a beginning of the universe. J.M. Wersinger, who is professor of physics at Auburn University, wrote, "At first, the scientific community was very reluctant to accept the idea of a birth of the universe."
The idea that the universe has existed for a finite amount of time is not the same as a birth of the universe. As I said, since time itself is finite in the past, then even God, if he exists, would have only existed for a finite amount of time. Apologists don't take this to mean that the earliest moment of time was the birth of God. They believe that God's existence is non-contingent, despite the fact that he has not existed for an infinite amount of time. I think the universe's existence is non-contingent. The past finitude of the universe is not proof that the universe came into existence.
Not only did the Big Bang model seem to give in to the Judeo-Christian idea of a beginning of the world, but it also seemed to call for an act of supernatural creation.
How could it seem to call for something altogether incoherent? What exactly is a supernatural act? What would it mean for something supernatural to even exist, let alone commit acts?
It took time, observational evidence, and careful verification of predictions made by the Big Bang model to convince the scientific community to accept the idea of a cosmic genesis. The Big Bang is a very successful model that imposed itself on a reluctant scientific community. The Big Bang theory thus agrees with the Bible's doctrine of creation.
Insofar as the doctrine of creation says that time itself is finite in the past, this doctrine isn't something you can sensibly infer from the Bible.
Now, this can have life-changing implications.
If you make a bunch of incoherent non sequitur inferences from it, I suppose it can, but that's true of literally every proposition.
For example, when Jan and I were studying in Germany, we met a scientist named Eva Drescher. Eva Drescher was a prominent Polish physicist, even had a sound wave named after her. And one day, the conversation turned to the subject of God. And Eva said to Jan and me, "Physics has destroyed my belief in God. As I look out at the universe, all I see is darkness. And as I look in at my own heart, all I see is darkness."
What does that have to do with physics? How did physics result in darkness in someone's heart?
And I thought, wow, what a poignant description of the human predicament. Darkness without and darkness within. Well, at that point, Jan said, well, you should read Bill's doctoral dissertation. He uses physics to prove the existence of God.
He doesn't, by the way. Whenever Bill uses physics to argue for God's existence, he sometimes misunderstands the physics, like with the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. And even when he accurately describes physics, he draws inferences that don't follow from his premises, and don't even make sense in and of themselves. There's no way to infer from physics or anything else that a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind exists because such a notion is self-contradictory. To say that something is timeless and spaceless is to say that it exists nowhere and never.
And Eva said she was interested in reading it, so we gave her my doctoral dissertation, which had not yet been published.
Those subtitles are in the original video, by the way. I'm not the one who can't decide how to spell Ava's name.
And over the next few days, she became increasingly excited as she read it. She said, I know these men that you're quoting. These are colleagues and scientists. When she finally got to the end of the dissertation, she gave it back to us and said, thank you for restoring my belief in God. I do believe in God after all.
I highly suspect that there's more to this story than Bill is describing. If her belief in God was restored, then she had previously believed in God. Given the depressing way she described the universe and her heart, it seemed as though she missed believing in God and thus probably had a cognitive bias in favor of Craig's arguments. I really doubt that she came to the conclusion that God exists based merely on Craig's dissertation alone.
And we said to her, well, would you like to know him personally? And she said, of course. And so we made an appointment to meet her for dinner that night at a restaurant. And meanwhile, that afternoon, Jan and I made from memory a handmade 4 spiritual laws to share with Ava. And after dinner that evening, we opened it up and began, just as there are physical laws that govern the physical universe, so there are spiritual laws that govern your relationship with God. And she said, what? Physical laws, spiritual laws, this is just for me.
Are these spiritual laws descriptive, just as the laws of physics are descriptive, or are these prescriptive laws?
And by the time we got to the end of the booklet where it shows the 2 circles, one with Christ in the life and one with Christ outside the life, and we asked her which circle best represents your life, she clapped her hand over the diagram and said, oh, this is so personal, I cannot answer now. And we said, that's fine. Let us just explain to you how you can give your life to Christ.
Even if she did conclude that a God exists from evidence Craig presented from physics, why would she then become a Christian? I've never heard Craig argue that physics shows that Jesus is God incarnate, or that he died for everyone's sins. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.